Chapter 4. Awareness. Who am I? Why is it that so many people are so unaware of their own higher existence? The answer is that their faculty of awareness itself is that spiritual existence. Whatever they know, people know through the consciousness within them. That in them which knows anything is their divine element. The power of knowing, whether it be a thought that is known, a complex of thoughts such as memories, a thing such as a landscape, is a divine power, for it derives from the higher self which they possess. It is a quest to become conscious of consciousness, to explore the I, and penetrate the mystery of its knowing power. If we want certain knowledge instead of vague hope, that answer to this question, who am I, is I am of godlike essence. We must follow the quest into its disciplines and practices. The mysterious question, who am I, is certainly deeply important, which is why it was put forward from the very beginning of his career by Ramana Maharshi. There's also another question which one may venture to state. Where am I? Am I here, in the fleshly body, or in the invisible mind? Everything remembered is a thought in consciousness. This not only applies to objects, events, and places. It also applies to persons, including oneself. He who is remembered, the I that I was, this means that my own personality, which I call myself, was a thought in the past, however strong and however persistent. But the past was once the present. Therefore, I am not less a thought now. The question arises, what did I have then which I still have now, unchanged, exactly the same? It cannot be I as the person, for that is different in some way each time. It is, and can only be, I as consciousness. The knowledge that no two human beings are alike refers to their bodies and minds. But this leaves out the part of their nature which is spiritual, which is found and experienced in deep meditation. In that the deepest part of our conscious being, the personal self, vanishes. Only consciousness in itself, thought-free, world-free, remains. That is the source of the I feeling, and it is exactly alike in the experience of all human beings. This is the part which never dies, where God and man may mingle. The presence is always there, always waiting to be recognized and felt, but inner silence is needed to make this possible, and few persons possess it or seek it. That we know this awareness exists means only that we have an idea of awareness. We do not see that awareness as itself an object, nor can we ever so. If we are to know the awareness by itself, first we would have to drop knowing its objects, its reflections in thought, including the ego thought, and then be it, not see it. If we search into the innermost part of ourself, we come in the end to an utter void where nothing from the outside world can reflect itself, to a divine stillness where no image and no form can be active. This is the essence of our being. This is the true spirit. In the void the real is hidden, all time is rolled up there. The entire world and the space holding it dissolves there. Everything and everyone emerges and vanishes there. That alone is the ever-real, ever-being. That is what man must learn to consider as his own hidden being, a task of re-identification. In that silent center there is immense power and rock-like strength. The Overself perceives and knows the individual self, but only as an imperturbable witness, in the same way that the sun witnesses the various objects upon the earth but does not enter into a particular relation with a particular object. So, too, the Overself is present in each individual self as the witness and as the unchanging consciousness which gives consciousness to the individual. There is only a single light of consciousness in the mind's camera. Without it, the world cannot be photographed upon the film of our ego mind. Without it, the ego mind itself would be just as blank. That light is the Overself. When man shall discover the hidden power within himself, which enables him to be conscious and to think, he will discover the Holy Spirit, the ray of infinite mind lighting his little finite mind. Consciousness appearing as the person seeks itself. This is the quest. But when it learns and comprehends that it is itself the object of that quest, the person stops not only seeking outside himself, but even engaging in the quest itself. Henceforth, he lets himself be moved by the Overself's flow. Too often, beginners regard lofty emotions or extraordinary powers or ecstatic rapture as the measure of attainment, when the only genuine measure is awareness. This is the spiritual climax of one's life, this dramatic moment when consciousness comes to recognize and understand itself. The ego and the Overself. What am I? What we commonly think of as constituting the I is an idea which changes from year to year. This is the personal I. But what we feel most intimately as being always present in all these different ideas of the I, that is the sense of being, of existence. But what we feel most intimately as being always present in all these different ideas of the I, that is the sense of being, of existence, never changes at all. It is this which is our true enduring I. Think. What does the I stand for? This single and simple letter is filled with unutterable mystery. For apart from the infinite void in which it is born and to which it must return, it has no meaning. The eternal is the hidden core and content. There is some life power from which we derive our capacities and our intelligence. It is hidden and intangible. No one has seen it, but everyone who thinks deeply enough can sense that it is there, always present, and always supporting us. It is the Overself. The true self of man is hidden in a central core of stillness, a central vacuum of silence. This core, this vacuum, occupies only a pinpoint in dimension. All around it there is a ring of thoughts and desires constituting the imagined self, the ego. This ring is constantly fermenting with fresh thoughts, constantly changing with fresh desires, and alternatively bubbling with joy or heaving with grief. Whereas the center is forever at rest, the ring around it is never at rest. Whereas the center bestows peace, the ring destroys it. Our attachment to the ego is natural. It arises because we are unconsciously attached to that which is behind it, to the Overself. Only we are misled by ignorance wholly to concentrate on the apparent I, and wholly to ignore the unseen, enduring self, of which it is but a transient shadow. The I which trembles or enjoys the time series is not the real I. The personal ego has its singularities and particularities, its present aims and past memories, its life within time, its own temperament and special characteristics. All this amounts to this. It is unique. The individuality is the highest, subtlest, and finest, even divinest part of being. It is out of time. It is pure essence. The other is compounded entity. For it the hours do not pass. For the other there is a constant sequence, a moment-to-moment existence. Sometimes men catch a glimpse of it, this other self, which is really their own best self, and which is not something to be attained by a progression since it is forever present. It does not have or need thoughts. every moment which they give to identifying themselves with it is their salvation. If this takes one far from kith and kin, from all speech and all persons, it also carries him into a diviner relationship and communication with them. There is no real ego, but only a quick succession of thoughts which constitutes the I process. There is no separate entity forming the personal consciousness, but only a series of impressions, ideas, images, revolving around a common center. The latter is completely empty. The feeling of something being there derives from a totally different plane, that of the Overself. What is the ego but the Overself surrounded with barriers, conditioned by its instruments, the body, the feelings, and the intellect, and forgetful of its own nature? That a theme for meditation should be formulated in the interrogative is at once an indication that the kind of meditation involved is intellectual. What am I is a simple question with a complex answer. In this exercise, you will repeatedly think of what you really are, as distinct from what you seem to be. You will separate yourself intellectually, emotionally, and volitionally, so far as you can, from your flesh, your desires, and your thoughts, as being objects of your consciousness and not pure consciousness itself. You will begin by asking yourself, who am I? And when you comprehend the lower nature cannot be the real you, go on to asking the further question, what am I? By such frequent self-studies and self-discriminations, you will come closer and closer to the truth. The Overself is not merely a transient intellectual abstraction, but rather an eternal presence. For those who have awakened to the consciousness of this presence, there is always available its mysterious power and sublime inspiration. This beneficent, freedom-bestowing, character-transforming, soul-awakening, gentle presence is Overself. The Overself does not evolve and does not progress. These are activities which belong to time and space. It is nowhere in time and nowhere in space. It is here, in this deep, beautiful, and all-pervading calm, that a man finds his real identity. When in deep sleep we have absolutely no sense of time's existence at all, we are then in eternity. When we become thoroughly convinced of the illusoriness of time and make this conviction a settled attitude, eternity reveals itself even during the waking state. This is life in the Overself. This is not the same as totalizing the past, present, and future. All those belong to illusion. This realization gives perfect peace. Although the Overself does not pass through the diverse experiences of its imperfect image, the ego, nevertheless, it witnesses them. Although it is aware of the pain and pleasure experienced by the body which it is animating, it does not itself feel them. Although detached from physical sensations, it is not ignorant of them. On the other hand, the personal consciousness does feel them because it regards them as states of its own self. Thus the Overself is conscious of our joys and sorrows, without itself sharing them. It is aware of our sense experience without itself being physically sentient. Those who wonder how this is possible should reflect that a man awakened from a nightmare is aware once again of a revived memory of what he suffered and what he sensed, but yet does not share again either the suffering or the sensations. If a man could withdraw sufficiently from his ego to stop letting its interests and desires overpower him, he would thereby let peace come to triumph in his heart. The true paradise, the real heavenly kingdom, which has been postponed by an ignorant clergy to the post-mortem world, thus becoming far off and elusive, is in fact as near to us as our own selves, and as present as today. If we are to enter it, we can and must enter while yet in the flesh. It is not a time or a place, but a state of life and a stage of development. It is the ego-free life. The ego is not asked to destroy itself, but to discipline itself. The personal in a man must live, but only as a slave to the impersonal. These two identities make up his self. Resurrection, to die and live again, is a symbol. It means to leave the ego and enter the Overself in full consciousness. Identification with the best self in us is the ideal set for all men, to be realized through long experience and much suffering, as through accepting instruction, following revelation, unfolding intuition, practicing meditation, and living wisely. And this best self is not the most virtuous part of our character, though it may be one of the sources of that virtue, but the deepest part of our being underneath the thoughts which buzz like bees, and the emotions which express our egotism. A sublime stillness reigns in it. There in that stillness is our truest identity. The mysterious character of the Overself inevitably puzzles the intellect. We may appreciate it better if we accept the paradoxical fact that it unites a duality, and that therefore there are two ways of thinking of it, both correct. There is the divine being which is entirely above all temporal concerns, absolute and universal, and there is also the demi-divine being, which is in historical relation with the human ego. This is the paradox, that the Overself is at once universal and individual. It is the first because it overshadows all men as a single power. It is the second because it is found by each man within himself. It is both space and the point in space. It is infinite spirit, and yet it is also the wholly present in everyone's heart. Why I chose Who Am I? 1, because I wanted to start with the idea of non-I consciousness, instead of your own I, with which they are continuously occupied. 2, because the word Brahman is of neuter gender, neither masculine nor feminine. Brahman in us is Atman, the self, but utterly impersonal. What lends itself more easily to this impersonality than who? 3. The answer to what am I is multiple, but it begins with a part of the world, and is followed by another question. What is my relationship to this world? The answer requires the discovery of mentalism, leading back through the thought of world, thinker, consciousness, and consciousness to Brahman. The answer to the question, what am I, is a divine soul. This soul is related to and rooted in God, but that does not make us equivalent to God. Those who say so are using language carelessly. The inability of little man to enter into the knowledge of transcendent God does not doom him to perpetual ignorance. For God, being present in all things, is present in him too. The flame is still in the spark. Here is his hope and chance. Just as he knows his own personal identity, so God knows God in him as the Overself. This divine knowing is continually going on, whether he is awake or asleep, whether he is an atheist or a saint. He can share in it too, but only by consenting to submit his intellect to his intuition. This is not an arbitrary condition imposed by theocratic whim, but one which inheres in the very nature of the knowing processes. By accepting it, he may put the whole matter to test and learn for himself in due time his own non-personal identity. Man does not exist alone, isolate. He is himself part of the universe in which he is born. Therefore, he cannot obtain an adequate answer to the question, what am I, unless he also obtains an answer to the question, What is my relationship to the universe? Consequently, the mystic who is satisfied with the answer which he discovers through meditation to the first question is satisfied with a half-truth. Perceive these two things now, the dreamlike character of life in the world and the illusory character of the personal ego. Hence the need of the "what am I?" inquiry, that the illusion of the ego may be dispelled. When you can see these things clearly, then you may be still and undisturbed, unentangled, and unillusioned amid the struggle of life. You will be wise, free, impervious to the petty persecution of men. Your lies, malice, and injuries, for being no longer identified with the personality, you are no longer their target. The source of wisdom and power of love and beauty is within ourselves, but not within our egos. It is within our consciousness. Indeed, its presence provides us with a conscious contrast, which enables us to speak of the egos as if it were something different and apart. It is the true self, whereas the ego is only an illusion of the mind. Is it possible to unite both ways, the active life in the world outside and the quiet life in the stillness within, and find no break, no essential difference, no falsification of the oft-stated idea, God is everywhere? The answer is yes, and has been tested in ancient and modern experience. What is the world? Gives the same reply as who am I? Withdrawing from the physical sense world as the mystic does, or going into physical action with the senses engaged, need not break the union, the awareness of divine presence. The ego self is the creature born out of man's own doing and thinking, slowly changing and growing. The Overself is the image of God, perfect, finished, and changeless. What he has to do, if he is to fulfill himself, is to let the one shine through the other. How close is his relationship to that other self, that godlike self, and not only his mind's relationship, but also his body's. For in the center of every cell in blood, marrow, flesh, and bone, there is the void that holds and is pure spirit. The ego is not really killed, but without body and intellect, emotion and will, could anyone act in this world? But the center of being is moved out of it to the Overself. Once this question, who am I, is answered, there are no other questions. In the light of its dazzling answer, he knows how to handle all his problems. Mentalism, the key to non-duality. Mentalism, the teaching that this is a mental universe, is too hard to believe for the ordinary man, yet too hard to disbelieve for the illumined man. This is because to the first it is only a theory, but to the second it is a personal experience. The ordinary man's consciousness is kept captive by his senses, each of which reports a world of matter outside him. The illumined man's consciousness is free to be itself, to report its own reality, and to reveal the senses and their world to be mere ideation. It is all like a gigantic dream, with every human inserting his own private dream inside the public one. A double spell has to be broken before reality can be glimpsed. The spell which the world lays upon us, and that which self lays upon us. The man who has completely awakened from this spell is the man who has gained complete insight. This faculty is nothing other than such full wakefulness. It is immensely difficult to attain, which is why so few of the dreamers ever wake up at all, and why so many will not even listen to the revelations of the awakened ones. However, nature teaches us here as elsewhere not to let patience break down. There is plenty of time in her bag. Life is an evolutionary process. Men will begin to stir in their sleep erratically but increasingly. While the dream is still continuing, He cannot help taking its scenes and figures as being quite real. But if someone rings a bell until he awakens from the dreaming state, he will then see that both scenes and figures were mere figments of his own imagination. In a sense, the teacher of philosophy acts as this awakener did, except that he directs his efforts to the sense-deceived consciousness of everyday life. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita is the individual's own higher self. He must keep his inner shrine within the heart reserved for the ideal. He should worship there the spirit that is birthless and deathless, indestructible and divine. Life in this world is like foam on the sea. It passes all too soon. But the moments given in adoration and obeisance to the soul count for eternal gain. The most tremendous historic happenings on this earth are, after all, only pictures that pass through consciousness like a dream. Once the seeker awakens to the real, he sees them for what they are. Then he will live in its serenity, and it will no longer matter if the pictures themselves are stormy and agitated. It is the greatest good fortune to attain such serenity, to be lifted above passion and hatred, prejudice and fear, greed and discontent, and yet to be able to attend effectively and capably to one's worldly duties. It is possible to reach this state. The seeker may have had glimpses of it already. Someday, sometime, if he is patient, he will enter it to stay, and the unimaginably rewarding and perfect purpose of his life, all of his lifetimes, will be fulfilled. The illuminate sees objects as other persons do. Only his sense of materiality is destroyed, for he sees them too as ideas, unreal. The illuminate's viewpoint is not the yogi's viewpoint. The illuminate finds all the world in himself, says the Gita. This means he feels sympathetically at one with all creatures, even mosquitoes or snakes. The two analyses must come together now, simultaneously, the what am I and what is the world. Then only can they be unified by mentalism, reappearing in and as the one consciousness. The duality of self and non-self vanishes. It is not the five senses which know the world outside, since they are only instruments which the mind uses. It is not even the intellect, since that merely reproduces the image formed out of the total sense reports. They are not capable of functioning by themselves. It is the principle of consciousness which is behind both, and for which they are simply agents, that really makes awareness of the world at all possible. It is like the sun which lights up the existence of all things. Not only is the world an appearance in consciousness, but so is the ego. It is in the end a thought, perhaps the strongest of all, and only the consciousness in itself is the reality from which it draws sustenance, existence, life. If the investigation of time made in depth by intelligence shows the real essence of it to be an eternal now, so a similar investigation of space shows its real essence to be an eternal here. Both these results are also to be reached in actual experience sharply and clearly, in meditation in depth. But where are they? The answer is given briefly and precisely by mentalism. They are in consciousness. The teaching of non-duality is that all things are within one and the same element, consciousness. Hence there are no 2 or 3 or 3 million things and entities. There is in reality only the one, consciousness. Earth life is but a dream, lived out in a dream physical body amid dream environment. Dream experiences are only ideas. During sleep dream, man sees, hears, touches, tastes, and smells, exactly as he does during waking dream. Hence, waking is but materialized ideas, but still ideas. God's cosmic dream. All universal activities are but different ideas of God. Divine ideation made material and thrown upon the screen of human consciousness. The cosmic illusion is impinged upon man's sense and seen from within by mind through conscious sensation and bodily organ. The Vedantin tells you, your experience of the world is illusory. You take it to be existent. You see a snake where there is only a rope. But the philosopher comments, it is misleading only if while you are in the body you take it to be utterly and ultimately real. The world is actually there, but what is it that makes it there for you? Consciousness. That is the reality. What you call consciousness is only a fragment, a small confined thing compared with its source. In the waking state, we experience the physical world. In the dream state, our experience corresponds to the etheric astral world. In the deep sleep state, we enter a still higher level of experience, which is that of the God whose will is expressed in the other and lower two worlds. This God the Hindus call Ishvara. I have called it world mind. Now underlying these three states and therefore the reality, the consciousness, the real consciousness underneath them, man experiences as enlightenment. The other three are states, whereas this is the reality supporting those three states, waking, dream, and deep sleep. In deep sleep, man reaches God, it might be said, but owing to his ignorance he is unaware, so he does not benefit from it. Consciousness really does not exist, whereas the things which it makes known are present only when they are perceived, felt, heard, or otherwise sensed by one or more of the five reporting agents. This consciousness is in itself always the same, unvarying, the one thing in us in which thoughts and bodies make their appearance and from which they also vanish. Inwardly and daily he returns to this idea that all is idea, that the familiar world, its places and people, its city life seething with activity, its vaunted civilization and polished culture, no other existence than in his consciousness, and takes its reality from that. So to become conscious of consciousness detached from its productions, thoughts, is his task, draws his strength and devotion. The mental images which make up the universe of our experience repeat themselves innumerable times in a single minute. They give an impression of continuity and permanency and stability only because of this, in the same way that a cinema picture does. If we could efface them and yet keep our consciousness undiminished, we would know, for the first time, their source, the reality behind their appearances. That is, we would know mind in itself. Such effacement is effected by yoga. Here then is the importance of the connection between mentalism and mysticism. The student has to stand aside from the thought forms, which means that he must stand aside from the person and look at it as something external to himself. If and when he succeeds in getting behind it, he automatically adopts the standpoint of the Overself. He must make the person an object and the Overself its observer. Now this element of pure awareness is something constant and unbroken. Hence it is not ordinary consciousness, which is a discontinuous thing made of totalized thoughts, but transcendental consciousness. The world looks just as it did before, being understood for what it is, a thought series. Does not alter its appearance. The sage's perception of it is like other men's. His senses function like theirs. But he knows that his experience of it depends on the ever-presence of consciousness. He is never without this awareness. This is the large first difference. A, the one without a second, reappears in the universe as no two things alike. B, non-duality, not two, means mentalism. The world is my idea, in my consciousness, hence not separate from me. There are not two, me plus world. The understanding that everything is elusive is not the final one. It is an essential stage, but only a stage. Ultimately, you will understand that the form and separateness of a thing are illusory, but the thing in itself is not. That out of which these forms appear is not different from them. Hence reality is one and the same in all things. This is the paradox of life, and a sharp mind is needed to perceive it. However, to bring beginners out of their earthly attachments, we have to teach first the illusoriness of the world, and then raise them to a higher level of understanding and show that the world is not apart from the real. That thou art unifies everything in essence. But this final realization cannot be got by stilling the mind, only by awakening it into full vigor again after yogic peace has been attained, and then letting its activity cease of its own accord when thought merges voluntarily into insight. When that is done, you know the limitations of both yoga and inquiry as successive stages. Whoever realizes this truth does not divorce from matter, as most yogis do, but realizes non-difference from it. Hence, we call this highest path the yoga of non-duality. But to reach it, one has to pass through the yoga of philosophical knowledge. There are two viewpoints: a qualified truth for the lower stage of aspirants, which admits duality, and the complete viewpoint of non-duality for the highest student. Thus, for practical life, when dealing with other people, or when engaged in some activity, those in the first stage must accept the notion of the world being real because of expediency. Yet even so, when they are alone or when keeping quiet and active, they ought to revert back to regarding the world, which includes one's own body as a part of it, an idea. Only for the sage is the truth always present, no matter whether he is with others, whether he is working, or whether he is in trance, and this truth is continuous awareness of one reality alone and oneself alone. There is only one mind, and all such names as cosmic mind, overmind, and so forth are merely imperfect and partial concepts of that ultimate single mind, which philosophy puts forth in order to help students advance to a higher stage. These concepts are not false, however. They represent aspects of the same ultimate mind as seen from different standpoints. As these standpoints are not the highest, they do not yield the final truth. It will be well, therefore, for him to accustom himself to the highest standpoint and to remember always that there is but one mind, one reality, one principle, one substance, one being only. All things are forms or shapes which it appears to take temporarily. The key to the understanding of these admittedly difficult points is to think of the universe seen through during dream, and then to remember that that universe itself, its seas and continents, its peoples and animals, its happenings in time, its distances in space, do not exist apart from the mind of the dreaming person. That even if millions of people exist within that universe, they are nothing else than ideas passing through the mind of the dreamer. And that their ultimate stuff or reality is mind, although to the dreamer they appear real, as do also water, fire, gas, and even the 90-odd chemical elements. Now he must try to regard the waking universe in the same way, with this difference, that because the ego is one of the dreamed-of figures in the waking dreams, it must be eliminated if one is to break through the dream and ascertain that it is a dream in the universal mind. The term non-duality remains a sound in the air when heard, a visual image when read. Without the key of mentalism, it remains just that. How many Vedanta students, and be it said teachers, interpret it aright? And that is to understand there are no two separate entities, a thing and also the thought of it. The thing is in the mind, is a projection of the mind as the thought. This is non-duality. For mind is not apart from what comes from and goes back into it. As with things, so with bodies and worlds. All appears along with the ultimately cosmic but immediately individual thought of them. To arrive at the understanding that the universe is non-material and is mental is to be liberated from materialism. It produces a sensation like that felt by a prisoner who has spent half a lifetime cooped up in a dark and dingy, fetid dungeon and who is suddenly liberated, set free, put out of doors in the bright sunshine and fresh clean air. For to be a materialist means to be one imprisoned in the false belief that the matter world is the real world. To become spiritual is to perceive that all objects are mental ones. The revelation of the mental nature of the universe is so stupendous that it actually sets mind and feeling free from their materialistic prison and brings the whole inner being into the dazzling sunshine of truth, the fresh atmosphere of reality. All those who believe in the materiality of the material world and not in its mental nature are really materialist, even if they call themselves religious, Christians, spiritualist, occultist, or anthroposophist. The only way to escape materialism is not to become a follower of any psychic cult or religious faith, but to inquire with the mind into the truth of the matter, and to be rewarded at length by the abiding perception of its mental nature. All other methods are futile, or at best are but preparatory and preliminary steps. It is a fundamental error to turn the pure mind into an object of experience in an attempt to reach comprehension. Mind can know everything else, and is the inescapable condition of every experience. For by its light every object and every event is revealed, but it cannot itself be known in the same way that we know everything else. Ordinarily, there is a knower and a known, and mind would have to transcend such a relation were it to become aware of itself, which means that it would have to transcend thinking itself. Mind itself produces the categories of time, space, and cause, which make world experience possible and knowable, that is, thinkable, which is why it cannot be grasped in the same way. The nature of mind is unique, and before its sublime verity, speech trembles into silence. We must move from consciousness to its hidden reality, the mind essence, which is alone true consciousness, because it shines by its own and not by a borrowed light. When we cease to consider mind as this or that particular mind, but as all mind, when we cease to consider thought as this thought or that, but as the common power, which makes thinking possible, and when we cease to consider this or that idea as such, but as pure idea, we apprehend the absolute existence through profound insight. Insight at this stage has no particular object to be conscious of. In this sense, it is a void. When the personal mind is stripped of its memories and anticipations, when all sense impressions and thoughts entirely drop away from it, then it enters the realm of empty, unnameable nothingness. It is really a kind of self-contemplation. But this self is not finite and individual, it is cosmic and infinite. When we understand this truth, mentalism, we shall understand that the Overself is forever present with us and that this presence is more immediate and intimate than anything else in life.